Big Ten Media Days is going to start tomorrow, and I released a video discussing my all Big Ten offense 5 days ago. So here I am with my all Big Ten defense. I'm going to be starting with honorable mentions, then move on to the third, second, and first team. It'll be pretty much the same format as the all-conference offense video, but obviously talking about the defense and the defensive side of special teams, like the punters. So sit back, relax, and keep this video and the all-conference offense video in mind, as at Big Ten Media Days, the media reveals their all Big Ten teams. They already revealed some of their all-conference honor players. I know Jaden Reed was included there. CJ Stroud was unanimous. Jack Campbell as well, a guy we're going to be talking about today. He was honored there. So I'm just excited for Big Ten Media Days, and I'm making this video because I've had an all-conference offense and defense for quite some time, and I find it appropriate to talk about my opinions on who I think should be on what team before the media reveals theirs. If you haven't already subscribed to the channel, please do. The majority of my viewers are not subscribed to this channel. It would help me out a ton if you could subscribe, and then if you haven't already, like this video, and after you've watched everything, comment your thoughts on this video down below. Let me know if you would make any changes, if you think it's a good list, or if you think it's a horrible list. I love having conversations about my videos and just talking college football with y'all. So without further ado, let's get right into it, and first and foremost, breeze over the honorable mention players. And once again, this video, we are only talking about good players, so any criticisms that I may make are more so made to talk about why I don't think they should be on the first team or a team higher. It's not that they're bad players. Honorable mention players, especially in the conference that is the Big Ten, are still very good players. Let's start off at defensive tackle. Teron Vincent from Ohio State, Chris Jenkins from Michigan, and Lawrence Johnson from Purdue. At defensive end, you have Braden McGregor from Michigan, Isaiah Mullins from Wisconsin, Lucas Van Ness from Iowa, not Wisconsin, and Jeff Pietrowski, who's from Michigan State. Out of all those guys, I'd say McGregor and Pietrowski are probably the closest to moving up to my third team if I had to make any changes. At linebacker, the Big Ten is very deep at linebacker this year, especially Michigan State and Nebraska and Iowa. Curtis Jacobs from Penn State is there. Seth Benson from Iowa is there. Nakai Hill-Green from Michigan is there. And Jalen Graham from Purdue is also on this honorable mention list. At safety, you got R.J. Moten from Michigan, a player who shined at points last year. And then you have Xavier Henderson, who is he's a very good safety, and I would say a unique way. Michigan State's secondary was not good in coverage, and neither was Henderson, but Henderson led Michigan State in tackles. He had, I think, 3 sacks, and had a big play capability, and was definitely a leader and the best player in the Michigan State secondary. Then you have Xavier Nwankpa, who is actually going to be a true freshman at Iowa, and I have him on this list because I think that he's just going to do well. 5-star according to 24/7 Sports' own rankings, not the composite, and I think that with Phil Parker as his defensive coordinator and secondaries coach, that he is going to thrive. At cornerback, you got Mike Sanrostil, who is converting from wide receiver to kind of this all-purpose player for Michigan. He looked good in the spring game for Michigan, which I attended, but I want to see how he does on the field, and I can't give him too much benefit of the doubt because, again, he's switching over, and Michigan's defense lost a whole lot, so chemistry and the togetherness of the unit is more questionable than, let's say, Michigan's offense. But Sanra still was a good wide receiver. He looked good in the spring game, so I'm just going to give him an honorable mention here. Wouldn't be surprised if he finished higher than this at the end of the season. You got Cameron Brown from Ohio State, who was good when healthy last year. And you got Beanie Bishop, an incoming cornerback from Western Kentucky who's transferring to Minnesota to help with depth issues there. At punter, you got Brad Robbins from Michigan, a very good punter, and Torrey Taylor from Iowa. So those are the honorable mentions here. Now we're going to get into the third team, and we're going to talk about, briefly, of course, because there's a ton of players, just statistics and maybe some of my own thoughts about every player. So let's start off and get into the third team. At punter, you have Bryce Baringer, who has a phenomenal backstory, and he's a very good punter nationally. I mean, I think all three punters on my Big Ten teams are, I think, fantastic guys. I just gave an edge to Brian Buschini and Adam Korsak, but all three of those guys, there's an argument for either of them to be in first, second, or third. At safety, let's start at safety, then we'll go to corner, linebacker, and then talk about the D-line, I think is going to be the format for this video. Let's start off with Ronnie Hickman. Ronnie Hickman had 98 total tackles last year at Ohio State, 1 sack, 2 passes defended, and an interception. And Hickman returns. He's going to be in Jim Knowles' new scheme. I expect some improvement, and he led Ohio State in tackles last season. It wouldn't be a surprise if he did so again. Next, you do have Matthews from Indiana, Devon Monster Matthews, to be more specific. Matthews had 54 tackles, a sack, 4 passes defended, and an interception. I think that Indiana, they returned Matthews, they returned Jalen Williams. I think that their secondary is going to be one of the stronger positions for them on the field. Watch out for Matthews, and we'll talk about Williams here when we get to our second team. So I think that Indiana is good at this position. They're good at safety. They're also pretty solid, I would say, at corner. And speaking of corner, you have Joey Porter Jr. here at corner on the third team. Very easily could put him at second. Porter this past season had 51 tackles, 4 passes defended, an interception, and a forced fumble. You lose Tariq Castro-Fields, Jaquan Brisker from that secondary, but Penn State, James Franklin, they've had a history of just having good secondaries. And really, that's been the theme of Penn State under Franklin because of longtime defensive coordinator Brent Pry, who just develops good linebackers, develops good defensive linemen, develops good secondary players. He leaves, yes, but it will take time to see if new DC Manny Diaz keeps up the same trend or it's just a continual drop-off. I don't expect 1 year under a new system for Porter to be any worse than he was last year. And with Tariq Castro-Fields gone and Jaquan Brisker, who was a safety, but it's still a secondary piece lost, Joey Porter is going to play a more critical role and I think be a better player and have more responsibility in Penn State's secondary. You also have Quinton Newsome from Nebraska, who had 42 tackles, 1 sack, and 4 passes defended. Cam Taylor-Britt left, Deontay Williams left, and 1 other guy left. The cabinet for returning starters for Nebraska's secondary is pretty barren, so Quinton Newsome is going to have to step up. I think he will. Travis Fisher has proven himself to be able to develop secondary players, and I do think that Newsome will improve this year. It's why he's not in the honorable mentions section. It's why he's here on the third team. At linebacker, you have Mariano Sori-Marin, and he had 85 tackles, 3 passes defended, and a forced fumble. Minnesota's own defensive coordinator, Joe Rossi, said that he liked Minnesota's linebacker depth, and Mariano Sori-Marin is a returning starter in that group and was, I think, the leader, if I'm not wrong, in total tackles for Minnesota. Again, 3 passes defended and a forced fumble there. The Big Ten's very deep at linebacker, and you'll see this especially with Michigan State. I have 3 linebackers total on all 3 of my Big Ten teams. And you'll see where the other guy is. I'll give you a hint. His name is Cal Haladay freshman All-American. We'll talk about him in a few minutes. But Jacoby Windman, who we're talking about now, transferring in from UNLV, he had 118 total tackles. It's a pretty big number. 6.5 sacks, also a pretty big number for a linebacker. 1 pass defended and a forced fumble. And this is going to help. Bringing Windman in is going to help with Michigan State. They lose Jacob Panashuk, Drew Beasley. It's going to help them with the pass rush aspect. And I don't know if statistically he'll be the same, because he's not going to be the only guy in Michigan State's linebacker room or even on the defense like he was at UNLV, but he's a good player, and I think that he'll have an immediate impact. He just adds strength and depth to Michigan State's front seven and their linebacker core. Another incoming transfer is Aaron Brule, and he had 53 tackles, 3 sacks. He's transferring in from Mississippi State, so because he was playing high competition in the SEC, it's more likely his statistics will be relatively similar. He looked impressive in the spring game, and I just think that Michigan State's linebacker core overall, it's them and Nebraska for depth. I'd take Michigan State's for pass rush, Nebraska's for pass coverage, Michigan State's also for run stop, and for individual player who we'll get to on the first team in several minutes is Nick Herbig. I think Wisconsin has the best individual linebacker in the Big Ten. Moving on to defensive end, Ochon Mathis transferring in from TCU. I have him on here, 45 total tackles, 4 sacks, 3 passes defended. He was not himself last year in 2021 like he was in 2020, dealing with some, I think, injuries. But at Nebraska, his game is going to be, he's going to be more prepared for what it's actually like in the NFL as he plays much better offensive lines. I think that he's going to step up to the challenge and do well, especially with Garrett Nelson on the other side of Nebraska's defensive line. And you also got Zach Harrison. Zach Harrison from Ohio State started at defensive end last season, 33 tackles, 3 sacks, 4 passes defended, 2 forced fumbles. I think with Jack Sawyer and JT Tuimoloau, much more naturally talented, and Harrison just hasn't broken through like a lot of Buckeye fans had hoped that he would. I think that Tuimoloau and Sawyer are going to creep up on him in just defensive snap count, and they're going to be better than him, but Harrison's still going to be involved in that rotation, still a good player, as you have to be on Larry Johnson's defensive line, and for that I put him here on the third team. And at defensive tackle, you got Mozzie Smith at Michigan, 37 tackles, 3 passes defended and a pick, and you have Keanu Benton with 24 tackles, 2.5 sacks, 1 pass defended, and 2 fumble recoveries. Keanu Benton is one of the few guys returning from last year's Wisconsin's defense who lost a ton of production. I think they only have around 3 or 4 returning starters, and that's, Keanu Benton, Isaiah Mullins, I think, and Nick Herbig, and maybe one other player. If not, that's just those 3. Jim Leonard has a lot to rebuild and reload at with his defense, and returning Keanu Benton, an inside guy, really helps there. Now we'll move on to the second team. Again, third team and honorable mentions are good to great players. We're just going up and getting closer to the players who could be elite and who could have very long and great NFL futures, or at least who are more likely to. Pardon me there. You have Brian Buschini at punter, very good punter. He was the punter of the year from the Montana Grizzlies, which was an FCS team transferring into Nebraska to replace, to just be the better punter. Nebraska's special teams were horrible last year. They got Timmy Bleekrode at kicker, who I talked about in my all Big Ten offense video. They got Brian Buschini at punter. Very fantastic punter. At safety, you got Jair Brown, 73 tackles, 5 passes defended, 2 picks. Jaquan Brisker, one of the better safeties in the nation, is off to the NFL. Jair Brown is going to step up, be second teamer. I could very easily see him being first team. like very easily. Like if anyone wants to argue about why he's not on the first team, go ahead. He very well could be on that first team. Very fantastic player, has an NFL future. Tanner McAllister is something different. He's coming in from Oklahoma State. He doesn't quite have the same resume, let's say Jair Brown does, but the defensive staff additions that Ohio State's made, especially with their secondary coaches, and the fact that McAllister knows Jim Knowles' system better than the entire Ohio State defensive lineup, I think will give McAllister an edge here. And he had 42 tackles, 6 passes defended, and an interception last year at Oklahoma State, which was one of the better defenses in the nation. At corner, you have DJ Turner from Michigan. Many view him as one of the better corner prospects in the nation. He had 33 total tackles, 2 interceptions, one of which was a beautiful return for a pick 6 against Maryland, and 7 passes defended. DJ Turner, I think, is going to be the best player on Michigan's secondary. And you have Jalen Williams from Indiana. Again, Indiana, they have a lot of weaknesses, a lot of questions. I would say at secondary is one of the few areas where they frankly don't have questions. And Jalen Williams, 41 tackles and then 11 passes defended. Denzel Burke had 12. Many other great players had around those similar numbers. And Jalen Williams is just, call it what it is. He's a good, big, physical, he's a great cornerback. And he's on my second team for a reason. And playing at Indiana, it's not going to help you, but he deserves the recognition, even though he is on a team that, was just picked today to finish last in the Big Ten East. At linebacker, you got Junior Colson from Michigan. He was a freshman All-American last year. With Josh Ross, David Ojabo departing, I think that Junior Colson, who started last year, is going to take a bigger step forward. 60 total tackles, a half sack, 2 passes defended, and a fumble recovery. Junior Colson was actually given some votes, not for first place, but given some votes today, I think, for like Defensive Player of the Year or something. And I don't know if I'd place him that high. It's pretty bold, but he's a great player. There's a reason he started as a true freshman, and there's a reason I have him on my second team. He is going to be the guy in Michigan's linebacker room. And speaking of the guy, yes, he's appearing on my second team, and it's something that, I argued a little bit with myself about. Jack Campbell, guy who was a very good argument for first team and who was picked by the majority of the media to be the Big Ten Defensive Player of the Year, which I think goes to Nick Herbig, who obviously is now on my first team. Jack Campbell, 140 tackles, 1 sack, 5 passes defended, 2 interceptions, 1 forced fumble. That right there is quite the resume. That's a very impressive resume right there. And he's definitely a great linebacker prospect. He plays for Iowa. 140 tackles is just impressive as it is. Can he get better statistics than that? Well, knowing Iowa's defense and the fact that their defense is on the field for, I'd say, the majority of the game because of their offense, definitely. So Campbell is certainly someone who could, and there's definitely an argument for the fact that he should be on my first team. He's here on the second team, certainly a great linebacker, that's for sure. Big Ten linebackers, again, it's very deep this year. And then we have Nick Henrich from Nebraska, 99 tackles, just 1 shy of the century mark, and a half sack. Nick Henrich needs to take a bigger step forward with the loss of JoJo Domann, who was a safety linebacker hybrid. He went off, departed from Nebraska, which leaves Luke Reimer and Henrich here. And Henrich, I think, will take a step forward, but he is not quite at the first team level. I'd say that especially Campbell, but also Colson, have a better argument to be first teamer than Nick Henrich. But Henrich is still a fantastic player, nearly 100 tackles. Him and Reimer by far led the Huskers last year in total tackles. At defensive end, you got Jack Sawyer and Mike Morris. Jack Sawyer from Ohio State, obviously highly touted recruit, came out of Ohio. He had 13 tackles last season, 3 sacks, a pass defended, and a forced fumble. I think with his natural talent, it seemed like he added on a decent few pounds of muscle this preseason. I think that it'll help push him higher on the depth chart here. You have Harrison, Sawyer, Tuimoloau. You have a lot of talent for pass rushers for Ohio State. So Larry Johnson has a rotation going on. I expect Sawyer and Tuimoloau to climb the ladder in that rotation, and Harrison, as I discussed earlier, to kind of slide down that ladder. So Sawyer, pay attention to him, pay attention to Tuimoloau, just pay attention to the Ohio State pass rush. I think it's going to be better than it has been in 2020 and 2021 specifically. At defensive end on the other side, you got Mike Morris from Michigan, 16 tackles, a half sack, 1 pass defended, and a pick. At linebacker, we've seen that the Big Ten's just returning a lot there. Mariano Sori-Marin, Junior Colson, Jack Campbell, Nick Henrich, and then Nick Herbig, Luke Reimer, and Cal Haladay, who we're going to discuss in the first team, they all started last year. At defensive end in the Big Ten, you have Garrett Nelson on the first team and Zach Harrison for Ohio State on the third team. Sawyer, Morris, and Tuimoloau, who's actually on my first team, they were rotation players or backups last season. And Mathis was in the Big 12, which he was still impressive there, but it's a different ball game in the Big 12 versus the Big 10. It just is. There's less passing, more running, more physicality, weather's colder, etc. Several differences. At defensive end, Aiden Hutchinson, he departed, and yeah, I mean, he was the best defensive end in the Big 10. And yeah, I mean, you just don't have the same returning production at defensive end that you do at linebacker. Again, linebackers really deep in the Big Ten, and part of that's just returning starters. Mike Morris was a backup last year, along with Taylor Upshaw, as Aiden Hutchinson and David Ojabo were the starters at that position. And I think that he is going to do well. Big physical guy. Yeah, he has big shoes to fill. I don't think he's going to fill the Aiden Hutchinson shoes. If I thought that, A, that'd be a little premature, and B, he would be on the first team. He's on the second team, great player. I think that Michigan is going to do better at replacing their departures on defense than others think, but you can't replace a generational pass rush duo. I'm not insane. And if Michigan does that, then I will be happy to be wrong. But Morris, good player, again, 16 total tackles, a half sack, a pass defended, and a pick. He's going to step up his game and start at end this year for Michigan. At defensive tackle, you have Javonte Williams from Ohio. No, you have Tyleik Williams, pardon me, for Ohio State. Got that mixed up with a running back from the Broncos. Tyleik Williams, 16 total tackles, 5 sacks. I think he was second for Ohio State in that category, and 2 passes defended and a forced fumble. Ohio State's D-tackle room, they lost Haskell Garrett. Tyleik Williams was one of the younger players, and he's going to step up along with Jack Sawyer and JT Tuimoloau to lead a Ohio State D-line that is maybe younger than it has been in years past, but it's just so talented that it's fascinating. So look out for Tyleik Williams there and that D-line for Ohio State, especially in pass rush. Also at defensive tackle, you got Simeon Barrow from Michigan State. Michigan State's D-tackle room is impressive in its depth. Him and Jacob Slade, and I was just looking at Michigan State's stats and their players, and there's another D-tackle who also had really good stats. I think he had 3 or 3.5 sacks. Their D-tackle room is deep. And watching Michigan State play as I cover the Big Ten and, watch the MSU Michigan game, which was Michigan State's best game, they can shut down the run. They just can. They can attack the interior of any offensive line with the D tackles they have. And Simeon Barrow is a great player. He's a great player. Was a freshman last year in 2021. and he's going to have another good year along with Jacob Slade. With the departures at defensive end, that's going to result in, I think, the D-tackle room and the linebacker room stepping up, as there is some inexperience at defensive end. And Simeon Barrow is certainly going to show himself and show that his D-tackle room might be the deepest in America, which almost sounds weird to say, but it might be true. Michigan State's D-tackle room just is that deep and that solid. And speaking of deep and solid, we're now getting to players who I view as, top tier. Players who at least could be, second team. Maybe there's some kind of an argument for them to be on third team, but they should be on one of the top 3 teams nonetheless. And they're great. They're all fantastic. I mean, just look at Riley Moss at cornerback, Nick Herbig, Cal Haladay, Luke Reimer. I mean, that's a solid linebacker room right there. JT Tuimoloau, Garrett Nelson, who out of all of the defensive ends on my 3 all-conference teams, actually has the most sacks, which is crazy to think about, that Garrett Nelson from Nebraska is, the guy with the most impressive statistics to return from last year. As I was saying, Mathis, Sawyer, Morris, Tuimoloau, guys that we've talked about at the edge position, they either didn't start last year or they did start just at another non-Big Ten school. The other starting defensive end on all these 3 teams was Zach Harrison from Ohio State. Adam Korsak, punter from Rutgers. And Rutgers, they have a lot of struggles for sure. But one thing that Rutgers is just, they're just great at it, is special teams. Greg Schiano knows what he is doing on special teams. They're good at what they can be good at. He had 72 punts in 2021. One inside the 20, a long of 74, an average of 45.8. And I think that he is going to continue to improve. He is from Australia, and his numbers, his average has improved by at minimum a yard per year. And then from 2020 to 2021, it improved by nearly 3 yards. So Adam Korsak, one of the best punters in the nation. At safety, you have Tyler Nubin and Jordan Howden, 2 guys from the same school dominating at secondary. Minnesota, in their pass defense, I think is going to be the strength of the defense. They lost a lot on the defensive line. Yeah, they did lose a lot at corner, but they brought in Beanie Bishop from Western Kentucky and some other corners via the portal. At safety, though, Tyler Nubin, Jordan Howden, they've been playing at Minnesota and starting since, even 2019. Tyler Nubin had 49 total tackles, 1 sack, 2 passes defended, and 3 interceptions. Jordan Howden had 43 total tackles and 5 passes defended. This duo is a fantastic safety duo. So watch out for them. And Minnesota's defense, period. Joe Rossi knows what he is doing on the defensive side of the ball. Minnesota's defense, along with their arch rival Wisconsin, was one of the better defenses in the nation last year. And they return a lot at safety. They lose a lot at corner and D-line, and they return a good chunk at linebacker too. So look for safety and linebacker to take bigger roles, to be better than they were last year. And the D-line and corner are certainly question marks that you'll find out very quickly if Minnesota's answered them, especially at the defensive line, with how physical the Big Ten and especially the Big Ten West is at running the football. At corner, you have Riley Moss. And immediately, making this list months ago, immediately Moss, without question, was first team. No questions whatsoever. And that can be hard for me to do because I'm thinking, again, just look at defensive end, the lack of returning starters from all Big Ten schools there. Michigan State lost Jacob Panashuk. Michigan lost Aiden Hutchinson. Ohio State, they do this rotation thing, and Zach Harrison isn't broken out yet, and Sawyer and Tuimoloau are uber talented. Penn State lost Arnold Ebiketie. You have a lot of production at defensive end that's, losing, so there's not a clear number one guy. At corner there is, and I think it's Riley Moss. And you look at his statistics, you look at what Iowa's secondary has done. They've led the nation in interceptions for so many years it's not even funny. Riley Moss had 39 tackles, 5 passes defended, 4 picks, 2 pick sixes, and 1 fumble recovery. The guy's amazing. Fantastic. Lockdown corner. He chose to return. He had an option to go to the NFL, and he chose to return to Iowa. And with another year under Phil Parker and Kirk Ferentz, I think that there's a chance he could even be better. I think someone gave him a vote, or at least he was on the ballot for Big Ten Defensive Player of the Year. And with Dane Belton leaving, there's a realistic chance that happens, especially if he takes a big step forward. And it's hard to take a big step forward when you are already as good as Riley Moss is. On the other side, someone who has a better chance to take a huge step forward because he was a freshman last year is Denzel Burke. Denzel Burke, 37 tackles, 12 passes defended, and an interception. Fantastic guy for his age. 12 passes defended just speaks for itself. He was Ohio State's best coverage player. And he did have some weaknesses, as the entire Ohio State defense did, but I think he's going to improve. With how young he is and how good he was overall, he has a lot of potential. And I think that he's going to live up to his potential this season. At linebacker, you have Nick Herbig, who I think is going to be the Big Ten Defensive Player of the Year. 61 tackles in 2021, 9 sacks, 4 passes defended, a forced fumble, and a fumble recovery. Leo Chenal and Jack Sanborn are gone. Leaves room for Nick Herbig to just wreak havoc, to cause chaos on any offensive line that he faces. And I think that, again, linebacker room for Wisconsin clearing out is going to leave room for Herbig to just take a bigger chunk of responsibility on defense. And with how good he was last year, I don't see a reason why he at least isn't a candidate or in the conversation for Big Ten Defensive Player of the Year, and he is. He was second in votes behind Jack Campbell from Iowa's Big Ten Defensive Player of the Year. Big Ten linebackers, again, there's so many good ones, it's hard to pick. Luke Reimer is someone who I think is going to be impressive as well. He was one of the higher graded Big Ten linebackers, according to PFF, for coverage. 90 tackles, 1 sack, 5 passes defended, an interception, and 3 forced fumbles. Nick Henrich, there's an argument for him to be much lower than he is. There's an argument for him to be where he's at. Luke Reimer, there's not much of an argument for him to be much lower than he is. He's very good in coverage. With JoJo Domann leaving, between Henrich and Reimer, one of those two is going to have to step up. Eric Chenander's defenses have had a reputation of improving since he got there in 2018, regardless of returning production. So I think Luke Reimer is going to be the best linebacker for the Cornhuskers this season, unless you count Garrett Nelson as a linebacker, which I count him in the same way someone would count David Ojabo. He's an edge guy, a defensive end, really. And then you have Cal Haladay. 2 pick sixes that I would argue actually won the Spartans 2 of those games. Saved them against Pittsburgh when they were actually able to put together a drive, and if they hadn't gotten that pick 6 versus Indiana from Haladay, the raw score, assuming nothing else changed, would have led to an Indiana victory. So Cal Haladay is a clutch player, 89 tackles, half sack, 2 passes defended, 2 picks that were returned for 6, a forced fumble, and a fumble recovery. That's an impressive resume in itself. He was a All-American freshman as well, much like Junior Colson last season. So he's going to take a big step forward, be the best player in MSU's very deep linebacker room. At defensive end, you have JT Tuimoloau, 17 tackles, 2.5 sacks, 1 pass defended. He was one of the last players to commit in Ohio State's 2021 recruiting class, and it was a huge get. It was between Ohio State and Alabama, really, and Ohio State fans just have to be glad they have him because he's big, physical. He has it all. He was a top 10 player in that 2021 recruiting class and a part of one of Ohio State's best classes in history. Fantastic player. I think he's going to be the guy at defensive end this season for Ohio State. And Jack Sawyer also has an argument for that as well. And then you got Garrett Nelson from Nebraska, who had 57 tackles, 5 sacks, 2 passes defended, and a forced fumble. I made a video discussing him and the defense just a few days ago. And I believe that Garrett Nelson and Ochaun Mathis, much like JT Tuimoloau, Jack Sawyer, Zach Harrison, the Nebraska defensive end area, those defensive end players have real potential to be fantastic and to take Nebraska's defense to that next step, finally give Nebraska the pass rush that it needs to help close out close games when their offense is sputtering, which is, as we've seen in the Scott Frost era, unfortunately a commonality. Garrett Nelson's a fantastic player, and I think that he is going to be a first-team All-Big Ten guy, and if he has a good year this season, he might solidify himself an NFL future, despite Nebraska's reputation. At defensive tackle, you got Jacob Slade and P.J. Mustipher. P.J. Mustipher was injured last year. He only had 21 tackles and 1 sack, but I think he's going to bounce back from his injury. He's going to help lead the Penn State D-line to likely have a, once again, pretty solid season, as Penn State at the defensive line is just, call it what it is. They have talent there. P.J. Mustipher's going to be a leader there, and he was a great player when healthy last year. It was too bad that he got injured. And then you have Jacob Slade from Michigan State. 40 tackles, 2.5 sacks, 2 passes defended, and a fumble recovery. Jacob Slade and that Michigan State defensive tackle room are indeed impressive. And that's all I have to say regarding Michigan State's D-tackle room, and all I have to say regarding this video. If you enjoyed it, leave a like, hit that subscribe button, click the notification bell so you can get notified when I post content, and make sure to, that's if you're on the YouTube. Again, I encourage you to comment your thoughts down below if you have any, and if you're listening via the Spotify, make sure to follow this channel. Thank you all for watching. I'll see you guys around. Bye.